I've always hated silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind you get walking through the woods with nothing but wind in the trees and the distant call of a bird. I mean real silence. The unnatural absence of life, where the air feels too still and the quiet becomes something with weight, like it's leaning against your skin. I didn't always know this about myself, not until I took this job, not until I left everything else behind. And it all started with a letter. There was no return address, no logo, no sign of who had sent it. Just my name, printed too neatly on the envelope, like the kind of print you'd expect on court summonses or death notices. I almost threw it away, but the weight of the paper inside stopped me. It was thick, expensive. Someone wanted me to feel its importance. The letter itself was short. No explanations, no warm greetings. Just a cold offer. Blunt and clinical. A research contract of the highest confidentiality. Remote work required. Isolated conditions. Full compensation in advance. They knew my name. They knew my work. They knew how long it had been since my last grant dried up. Since I had left my last project under circumstances I no longer cared to explain. They knew I would say yes. The drive to the site felt like it took days. The further I went, the thinner the work became. The road narrowing until it was barely a path between walls of dead trees, their branches clawing at the sky. My GPS cut out an hour before I reached my destination, leaving me with hand-scrawled directions, the ink smeared in places where rain had touched it. But the final instruction was simple. Stay on the gravel road until you see the light. The light was a single flat lamp, flickering above a rusted gate, half swallowed by vines. But the air felt different there, thick, like standing just before a thunderstorm, the kind where the world holds its breath before the sky rips open. There were no signs, no guard posts, just the light, the gate and the silence beyond. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes, engine running, staring at that gate. I had no reason to feel afraid. Nothing had happened yet, but something inside me, some deep animal part, was whispering to turn back. But I didn't. I never do. The compound was smaller than I expected. Just a handful of low concrete buildings, featureless and grey, crouching low against the earth like they were ashamed to be seen. Half of them looked abandoned, cracked windows and rust-streaked walls. The air smelled wrong, metallic, almost sweet, like rain over hot metal, mixed with something rotting deep beneath the surface. A man in a pale coat met me at the entrance. He didn't smile, didn't offer his name. He just handed me a plastic badge, turned and walked away down a hallway dimmer than it should have been. I never saw him again. My room was a narrow rectangle with concrete walls, a cot and a metal desk, bolted to the floor. No windows, but a single overhead bulb that swayed slightly even with the air still, as if the room itself was shivering. High above the bed, a vent hummed softly, pumping in air that felt too dry, too processed, too old. There were no introductions, no welcoming brief. I was told to stay in my room until the morning briefing. No exploring. But I didn't want to explore. That first night, the silence had weight. It was too complete. No hum of distant machinery, no faint footsteps through the walls. Just silence, thick and absolute, wrapping around me like wet cloth. At some point in the night, I heard something. A faint scrape, like metal dragging over stone. I sat up, heart thudding, but the sound was gone. When I lay back down, I could hear it again. Fainter this time, like it was coming from somewhere inside the walls. I didn't sleep that night. The morning briefing was short and empty. There was no project name, no mission statement. Just a camera feed, a stack of log sheets and a single instruction. Record everything you see. Do not ask questions. The feed was black and white, washed in gray and grain. The camera stared at a single wall, uneven stone, slick with moisture. The kind you would find in a cave too deep for light. There was a single bulb overhead, swinging slightly back and forth. The wall seemed to pulse subtly. At first I thought it was the poor feed quality, or the flickering light. But as the hours crawled by, I could swear it was moving. A twitch here, a ripple there, like something beneath the surface was adjusting itself. Sometimes shadows moved across the feed, shapes too quick to see, but too slow to dismiss. And I logged it all. That was my job. Days bled together. My meals were left outside my door at irregular intervals, in plain white containers with no labels. They were always cold, and always flavorless. The silence grew heavier. The sounds through the vent grew louder. Wet, dragging noises like something being pulled inch by inch through a wet, narrow space. Sometimes I thought I heard breathing. I spoke to myself just to fill the void. My own voice sounded wrong, too loud in the stillness, echoing back at me thin and distorted. After a while, I stopped speaking. The silence felt safer. The first letter came a week in, slipped under my door while I slept. Plain paper, typed text, no signature. Have you heard it yet? I didn't know what it meant. I should have reported it, but there was no one to report to. No one answered the phone. No one passed in the halls. The second letter came 2 nights later. Don't speak to it, if it speaks first. The third came after the camera feed went dark for the first time. The wall is breathing. The feed went down for hours, the screen filled with static that seemed too wet, too alive. When the image returned, the wall was closer. Not by much, just enough that I doubted my own memory. But it was closer. After that incident, I stopped sleeping. The sounds in the vent weren't distant anymore. Sometimes I heard wet, shuddering breaths, just inches above my head. Sometimes the vent dripped. And last night, it spoke my name. It came through the vent, thick and broken, like someone trying to speak through water. My name dragged out over too many syllables, too slow, too soft. It was familiar, like hearing your own voice in a recording, warped and stretched until it barely resembled you at all. I didn't answer. I didn't move. It kept calling over and over until the silence felt like it was part of me, pressing down on my chest, filling my lungs with something heavier than air. I lay there for hours, eyes wide in the dark, listening to something in the walls shift closer. The wall is breathing. And now, so am I. I stopped marking the days. Time lost its shape somewhere between the fourth and fifth letters, after the voice started calling my name more often. Not just at night, but during the hours I spent sitting at my desk, watching the slow drip of the wall on the monitor. It wasn't always my name. Sometimes it was a laugh, thin and wet, bubbling like something trying to escape from a throat full of water. And sometimes it was my voice. The letters kept appearing, always slid under my door while I wasn't looking. I stopped trying to catch whoever delivered them. Deep down, I knew they didn't come from anyone else. Not really. It can hear you now. It knows how you breathe. Don't let it see your eyes. I started covering the vent with towels, sheets, anything I could tear away from my room. But it didn't help. The voice leaked through, soft as rot. It would whisper closer and closer, until it wasn't coming from the vent anymore. It was inside the walls, inside the floor, inside my own chest. The camera feed was my only anchor. I stared at that wall for hours, my eyes blurring, but I never looked away for long. The wall was moving. It wasn't my imagination. It would pulse, ripple, almost like breathing, slow and shallow, like the breath of something just waking up. And it was getting closer. At first, the distance was barely perceptible. An inch every day, maybe less. I thought I was losing my mind, but then, after one of the blackouts, after the static, the wall was so close I could see the details. Skin. Not stone, not damp rock, but skin. Stretched too thin over something that bulged and twisted just beneath the surface. There were veins, dark and sluggish, pulsing irregularly. They didn't follow any sane pattern, branching into spirals and shapes that made my stomach turn. And in some places, the skin was torn. Not from outside damage, but as if something inside had pushed too hard against it, splitting it open to expose wet, twitching meat. I locked it. That was my job. The smell was getting worse. Rot and metal, thick and cloying, like rusted meat left to fester in still water. It seeped through the walls, into my clothes, into my skin. And the letter stopped. The silence was too full now. No more subtle whispers. No more distant scraping. Everything was close. Right against the walls. The floor, the ceiling. I could hear it breathing. Slow. Uneven. Almost human. Almost. 3 nights ago, if time still meant anything, the camera feed flickered again. But this time, the static didn't stop. At first, I thought the camera was broken. But then I saw it. A shape. Pressed against the static like it was standing right at the edge of a screen. Human-shaped, but wrong. Like someone had tried to remember what a body looked like from a dream. The arms were too long. The head was too wide. The mouth was wrong, just wrong. No eyes, just a mouth, open too wide, stretching into the edges of the screen. And it was breathing. Its chest rose and fell. Too slow, too shallow. The sound crackling through the speakers. It was breathing in time with me. I held my breath and so did it. I stared at it and it stared back with that blind, gaping mouth. It was so close to the lens I could see its skin. Thin and translucent. Veins worming underneath like something alive. Then the lights in my room flickered, and I heard it in the vent. Let me in. I tore the screen from the desk. Sparks flew, black smoke curling up toward the ceiling, but I didn't care. The feed was gone, but the wall, the real wall, was still there, just beyond my door, beyond the concrete. It was closer now. I could feel it pressing in from all sides, like the whole building was just a thin shell stretched over something much larger, something breathing beneath my feet. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. My room felt smaller every hour, the air thicker, the silence too heavy to move through. And the lights flickered again. The vent dripped. It's in the walls. That was the first letter. I didn't need it to tell me. The first crack appeared in my ceiling yesterday. If it was yesterday. A thin seam of wet, dark flesh peeking through the concrete, pulsing in time with my own heartbeat. The longer I stared at it, the more it seemed to shift. Not randomly, but deliberately. Like it was spelling something. But I didn't read it. I packed what little I had. Not much, and left my room. The hallway outside was darker than should have been. The overhead lights reduced to sputtering embers. The walls were wet, streaked with something too thick to be water, seeping from the cracks that ran like veins through the concrete. The building was empty. The air hummed around me, low and rhythmic. The sound of something breathing in the dark. The floor trembled with each breath, slow and shallow. The building was breathing. No one stopped me. No alarm sounded. There was no one left. I followed the sound, and it led me down. Stairs I hadn't seen before, narrow and steep, curving endlessly into the earth. The air grew hotter, wetter. until every breath felt like it was filling my lungs with warm, rotting flesh. And at the bottom, there was a door. Not metal, not wood. Flesh, pale and stretched taut, bulging in places where something pulsed underneath, wet and slick. There was a single hole, too high to be a doorknob. It gaped at me, breathing, opening and closing in time with the heartbeat that filled the walls. It knew me. I could hear it whispering, wet and familiar, calling my name in my own voice, twisting the syllables into something obscene. Let me in. The door started to open, and I ran. I don't remember reaching the surface. I don't remember driving away. My car streaked with something dark and slick, the tires leaving tracks like blood in the gravel. I just remember the silence. Not the silence of the building, the silence inside me. I can still hear it sometimes, when the world is too quiet. That low, wet breathing, somewhere beneath my own skin. There's this faint scrape of something dragging itself just behind my heartbeat. It's still here with me. I am not sure if I ever really left. I still dream of the wall, but it's closer now, pressed against my eyelids when I try to sleep. And sometimes, when the room is too quiet, I hear my own voice whispering through the vents. Let me in.